morning, everyone, and a very big welcome. I'm Christine Milne, and I'm the co-convenor of the Restore Lake Pedder Committee. And I couldn't be happier to have so many of you here this evening to celebrate with us this wonderful collection of artwork showcasing the heart of Tasmania. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Momentous people, and acknowledge that they never ceded this land. And it seems very appropriate in a week in which, in many ways, the integrity at Uluru has been restored, that we're here celebrating the idea of restoring the heart of the Tasmanian World Heritage Area with the restoration of Lake Pedder. It's been a nearly 50-year campaign to restore Pedder, to try to stop the inundation, and then over the years the efforts to restore it. And we are now on a roll, let me tell you. We are on a roll because it's the 50th anniversary of the inundation of Pedder in March 2022. That is also the beginning of the United Nations Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. So what could be more appropriate than having Lake Pedder as a flagship of the United Nations Decade of Ecosystem Restoration in an age of global warming and ecological collapse? Because the work of this century is ecological restoration. It has to be. We have to protect what we've got left and restore what has been degraded. That is what is going to keep people connected to our home, the planet, and it's going to keep people optimistic about being able to do something. And I just have this enormous sense that people will really get behind the campaign this time to see Pedder restored, because Tasmania clean, green and wild has to be authentic. It doesn't, and it should not mean, of course, commercialisation of the wilderness, and we won't go there, but it should mean people getting in and restoring as much of the wilderness as we can. And with global warming drying out the southwest, the idea that we might be able to build resilience in the southwest by restoring the peatlands and actually taking on those issues is another way of proactively addressing this in an age of global warming and ecosystem collapse. So on that note, we want to start. I'd like to introduce you to Bob Walker. Bob was right back in the early days, in the early 70s, as part of the campaign. I think it's an appropriate place to start, to hear about the trials and tribulations. Mind you, it's pretty much Groundhog Day in Tasmania every day, but nevertheless, back to what it was like in the early 1970s. Bob.
Welcome, and it's nice to be in the room with so many people who have an interest in Pedder. Every time I've been surrounded by Pedder people, there is a dynamic, and it hasn't changed, and it's here tonight, so welcome. I was a bit of a Johnny-come-lately to the campaign. I didn't step in until the February of 1972, and you may recall that was the summer of 71-72 when it was predicted, and rightly so, that Pedder was going to be the last summer on Pedder, and indeed it was. But when we go back, a lot of work had been done before that, and a lot of heavy lifting was done in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. And basically Pedder was not known. Not many people. Lloyd Jones took a lot of people there flying, he was aware of it. A lot of bushwalkers, I saw a picture of Harry Bucky there in 1948, they were in there doing those sort of things. But in many ways we didn't know. In fact, it's interesting seeing some of young kids here tonight. When I was their age, I went to the city hall, and the Legis Africanus wasn't doing his audio visual, he was doing his presentation of his journey down the Gordon River. And it was 500 kids there, with a special invitation from schools. And there was this man giving this incredibly brave, incredibly adventurous story of a wilderness so far away. And to us, it was something that was just not part of our, it wasn't the Lex, it was so far away. A few weeks later in the same city hall, I sat and watched listened to Edmund Hillary giving his presentation of the climbing of Everest, and a lot of the same people in the same group. And there was a link between Hillary and the Himalayas and Lake Pedder in the southwest. To us as kids, they were just as far away, but they were great men and great adventurers. So the dynamic was the fact that in the community then, few people knew about Lake Pedder. But come the end of, beginning of 71, Lake Pedder Action Committee was formed. That had been preceded by the Southwest Committee, and a lot of work was done. Malagas was running his audiovisuals in the town hall to packed houses. There was a community feeling that something really bad was happening. The Premier mentioned that Lake Pedder National Park might be modified, that wonderful political word, and indeed that was going to be the case. So in come 71, a lot of things was happening. The Lake Pedder Action Committee had been formed. As I said, I was a Johnny-come-lately. I landed on the lake in February of that 72. And there was a tremendous movement of people, a lot of activity, a lot of enthusiasm to step out and look at that beach and that incredible cyclorama. And we see it here with the Franklin Ranges. It was mind-blowing, and unless you'd actually been there, it was very hard to convey that message. But I think the people who went to Pedder and saw it as it was were totally moved by it. I certainly was. I walked in there a decade before, and it was horizontal rain, cold and wet, and I didn't really see Pedder. I didn't think much of it. But when I went back in there, I suddenly realised this was that different. When you suddenly realise, hang on, this is what it is. And back in town, I always said I was Johnny-come-lately. I was just sort of basically in the background. But the UTG had been formed, there was a state election, the politics were fascinating. UTG had been formed, there was a fast-running election campaign. UTG had an office in Liverpool Street, and I remember going in there, and suddenly it was all go. Somebody said, we need a health policy. I said, well, okay, I'll write one. How long? We got 10 minutes. I said, that was the way things were done. I don't know whether it was right or wrong, but anyway, that was what it was. But there was the UTG election, and Ron Brown missed out by 150 votes. That's how close it was in that election of 72. Things rolled on. There were various sort of defeats in the upper house and lower house, time and time again. We became shopkeepers. We set up a shop in Elizabeth Street in the mall by the very generous donation of a Hobart family who gave it to us at a peppercorn rent. And that shop was amazing because it brought people in, another dimension of people who just dropped in, asked questions, made comments. The hydro workers walking past at lunchtime. It was really interesting. But we had a telephone. In those days, the technology, we didn't have mobile phones. A telephone, the old winding thing, was amazing. We actually paid for a telephone. It was connected. And one afternoon, one evening, somebody rang in and said, could you give us Dick Jones's telephone number? Because we want to talk to him about a legal matter. And sure enough, that happened. And that night, Dick received a phone call from somebody fairly attached to the legal community who said, take the following documents to Henry Cosgrove and Murdoch Clark, Cosgrove and Drake, and ask him to compare that regulation to that act, because I think you've got a case. Well, that was done the next day, and Henry Cosgrove says, yep, you've got a case. So there we went into the courts. We tried to get to court, but it was blocked by the government. Merv Everett had to sign a fiat to let it happen, because to take the government to court, you've got to get the government's opinion. That's the way it went. He refused and resigned. Eric Rees took over as Attorney General and refused to sign the fiat. Recalled Parliament, had the doubts removal bill. That caused a furore, not just conservation issues or the scenic issues or the moral, but it brought in a moral issue. The Bishop came out and criticised the Premier. And Rees responded, said how he should stick to bishopry. Dick Jones said, let's roll out a few more bishops, it's wonderful. And that was interesting how that happened. But once the doubts removal bill went through, it was very hard. And the campaign was slowing up here, but there was a federal election in the wind. And that's where Gough Whitlam had made a comment at Sunbury that we should see some of these issues through. And that's exactly what happened. There was a movement all around Australia, because Lake Pedder actually wasn't just here, it was in every state of Australia, it was overseas. Even Spike Milligan was at Tasmania House waving a banner. So in many ways that campaign rolled on. There were disasters. We lost Lagos in January of 72. Sadly, Max Bryce and Brendan Heen died in the tiger moth incident on their way to Canberra to do exactly that, to campaign for Pedder. And we must respect that that was a terrible thing that happened. And it put Pedder into a different light, and it was publicity we didn't want, but we got. But come 72, Whitlam came on board, and then there was this move to get an inquiry. The campaign was based at Canberra. Lee Holloway pulled up stakes here and camped basically in a caravan in Canberra and organised numerous lobbying visits. And we all went up there. You might wonder why I'm wearing a tie tonight, but that's what we had to wear to go to Parliament House. There were these people who would put on suits at a moment's notice and present ourselves to various ministers and politicians. And it was successful in the sense that we got the inquiry up. Angus took up Clive Sansom, who was really quite frail at that stage, and they wheeled him around Parliament House, and he lobbied, and with great effect. And they take him back to Senator Townley's office and fan him down and take him back to the trenches again. So that was what was going on. There's this incredible activity and enthusiasm. The Pedder inquiry came up, and Edward St John was a member of that. He went on to give his not only support what the committee said, which was to make a moratorium and make funds available. He came down here and campaigned on that. And he bounced around the state on the Land Rover, sitting on the back of a pile of sleeping bags, and we went to Burnie, Devonport, Launceston, down here. Then we had this meeting in Town Hall. There was Edward St John, who was a Liberal, true blue, right from that side of politics. The same night we'd organised Jack Mundy to come along and speak at the meeting. And there was Ted saying, hang on, he's a communist. and I'm a Liberal. Okay, I'll do it. And they both stood and they both spoke and put new dimensions to it. And between them, they let on the piano, on the grand piano on Town Hall stage, and helped put a motion together that had risen from the floor. So that came up, and on it went. The moratorium, they offered money to the state, it was turned down. And from then on, the Pedder campaign slowed down, but it didn't die. It went on to form the Environment Centre, and the Franklin campaign went on from that. But I can't acknowledge people because there were so many people involved, so many different professions, trades, academia, all the different, so many people involved, so many writers, graphic designers and artists, photographers did so much for Pedder and are still doing that. But Pedder has this ability to do what we see here. It lives. Okay, so
I feel good.
Okay, Pedder lives. So as we think about this, let's keep it alive. It's not dead. It lives, and we must keep working on unplugging the thing or whatever we've got to do together.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob. Out of what Bob had said. The first is, of course, most of you would realise that from the United Tasmania Group grew the Green Party, and the United Tasmania Group is the world's first Green Party, recognised as such by the Green Parties in over 90 countries around the world. And at the Global Greens Conference, where it was first formed in Canberra in 2001, the Global Greens, was first formed. I spoke to a young group of Brazilians who'd come over for that conference, and I said, where are you going after the conference? And they said, we're going down to Tasmania. And I said, oh, that's lovely. Why did you choose Tasmania? And they looked at me and said, well, we're going to Lake Pedder. We're going to pay homage to where it all started. And that is the sense that the Greens around the world have about Lake Pedder. And in that context, I just want to acknowledge here tonight Nick McKim, our Senator for Tasmania. I don't know if we've got any state members or they're sitting tonight, and their apologies. So I think that's really important. The other thing is I'd like to acknowledge and just ask you to put your hand up if you were involved in those early campaigns to save Lake Pedder, because I'm sure everybody would like to acknowledge the contribution. Discussed, the role of the arts is incredibly important. We've never won campaigns in Tasmania or anywhere in the world for that matter without the arts. You need the poetry, you need the stories, you need the photographs, you need the beautiful paintings. You need it all to do the connection with the heart, because that is what will motivate people to decide that they're really going to make this a cause celeb. And at the time, we didn't have colour television in Tasmania. And so the Sunday painters were really important to bring the colours of the landscape and the sky and the whole perspective to the community in a way, and obviously the photographers did that, and some of those early films that Alagus made as well that were transported, it was that. But there was also the music, and so we're now going to ask you to have a look at the television, because we have here tonight Stephen Crump, who is a composer, and he has composed this piece on Lake Pedder. Stephen Crump, it's called Unbroken, and it's basically paying tribute to what we all know, that Pedder is asleep under the lake. It is not broken, and nor is the chain of the campaign. So over to listen to this. Bob Brown, who's joined us here this evening. Bob, of course, was one of the people who, just towards the end, before the lake was inundated, was fortunate enough to be able to fly in there. And Bob has had a long association with the campaign, first of all the UTG and then the restoration movement over all these years. And I'm delighted to say he's part of the committee now, that we're on a roll to get this lake restored in the time frame, as I said, the 50th anniversary. We want the management plan, the restoration management plan, to pull the plug ready by the 50th anniversary. So over to you, Bob.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks, everybody. Well, what an exciting evening this is in one of the most exciting environmental campaigns there can be anywhere on the planet. And at a time when we all know the Earth's in meltdown, we've got this existential crisis, here is the back wave, the wave for a future for the planet in the form of restoration. Christine's talked about the decade of ecological restoration coming up, and here in Tasmania again, because of folk like you here tonight, we're going to have one of the key points globally for action during that decade and leading up to that decade, and it will bring international attention onto Lake Pedder, and of course through that onto the Pedder people who fought for the lake and had their souls trampled on so unnecessarily. I heard Christine on the radio this morning saying that the Pedder scheme produces less electricity than the Cattle Hill wind farm they're currently building on the Central Plateau, and it's much less. It'll be very easy to swap the energy for a very small solar power plant. Pedder's 60 megawatts, commonly solar plants these days are 250 megawatts, same with wind power. It is a disgraceful tittle of electricity for the mega damage it did, not just to the landscape and the Aboriginal land. It was their land long before, but to the souls of everybody who stood up for it. And this is Edward St John, we've been talking about, the Liberal MHA from North Sydney, said that he used the Latin because he was a barrister: we will have time to repent. Our children will undo what we have done. And so it will be. And Alagus Johannes, of course, said, why should we not leave Tasmania the more beautiful? And in the wake of restoration, his dream was to save Lake Pedder, our dream is to restore it, so that great symphonies, more great canvases in the future can inspire humanity through this very wonderful campaign that's really, as Christine said, ramping up and firing along now. And here are the artworks from that time. Here are paintings from plein air, sitting on the beach, being painted by Max Angus. That wasn't there, but it was to show people in Sydney, just after the Opera House, actually underway, but not complete. What the relative scale was, we're building this great human monument and destroying this much greater natural monument. And so the other artists and the generosity of the people who have donated these, what are now unique reflections of Lake Pedder through the minds of magnificent artists. So there's, I'm sure Christine's going to come to this, but there's going to be an auction on Sunday. There are reserves on these, but they're far too low, all of them. And if anybody can purchase these, then you will have a bargain, because the value is going to grow enormously, whatever happens to the art market, as this campaign for Pedder steams up in the coming years. So please have a look around and see what you think, and come back or leave your bid. You can do that. I'll leave that to you, Christine, to talk about. But at a time when the Tarkine is facing destruction, the Adani mine is said to be underway. That's what they think. They want to oil drill in the Great Australian Bight. Coal seam gas everywhere, except Tasmania at the moment. And the human stupidity, it isn't a lack of intelligence, it's just a deliberated stupidity. Here is a gem of an intelligent response from a collective of human beings, which points the way forward. We're in a very fortunate position here, but this campaign is going to be fun. It's going to be elevating. It's going to be internationally draw attention for good reasons on Tasmania. Lake Pedder is in the World Heritage Area. The region is protected. The scheme is simple. Just pull the dams out or open the plugs. There's only 2 or 3 of them. They're small, and the lake will be restored and replace the electricity with if you want a small solar power station or wind power station or something else in Victoria. People just turn their lights off in the morning for half an hour. That would be Lake Pedder saved very, very quickly. It's as Christine said, this is happening. It's going to happen. And the more we move on it, the faster it will happen. It's very, very exciting. So I love seeing what's happening here. I love the generosity. Rod Broadby, who's given this magnificent picture, had a campaigner right all the way through, and that's an extraordinary, valuable piece. So are all the rest. Just a wonderful idea, Christine and your crew. Congratulations. This is exciting, it's positive, it's uplifting, and it's going to happen. Yes. So all the more fun.
It won't happen without an awful lot of people, and so I would like to do some thank yous now to the people who've enabled us to put this exhibition together and to get the auction organised for Sunday. And as Bob said, if you want to, if you see something you'd like and you're not going to be able to be there on Sunday, Paul Thomas is at the back of the room. If you put your hand up, Paul, would you go and speak to Paul, and he will make a note of your phone number or your bid and that sort of thing. So that's the technicalities. All of this work is up on the Pedder website, the Restore Pedder, Lake Pedder website. So if you want to tell your friends about it, just send the link, and they can see all the pieces that are for sale on that and consider whether they might engage. But I wanted to thank particularly the people who had donated the artwork. So there's Melva Trahanas, of course, Patricia Giles, Elspeth Hope Johnson, Peter Angus, Rod Broadby, Bob Brown, Di Masters, David Bloodhorn, Andy Solosi, Philip England, Robin Trislow, Bob Graham and Chris Cowles. So thank you to those people who've given that work. A big thank you to you. Which many of you are familiar with, from Karen Alexander and David Nielsen of Snowgum Press, who over the years have been so fantastic at producing posters for the campaigns. I also want to thank Luke and Jemima Wagner of Wagner Framers for obviously framing quite a bit of the work here, Paul Rafferty, who came in and did the auction website for us, Kirsten Bacon for the catering, Trudy Curtis at Colville Gallery, who came and did the valuations for us, Luga Otson and Andy Terrell, who are doing the videos so that we have a record of our events, Paul Thomas, Hilary Bennell and Jeanette Hyland, who organised the actual exhibition, and Tabitha Badger, and of course with Jessica Robbins, who is our project officer, who puts it all together and gets everyone enthused and involved. So thank you very much, and to Stephen Crump, of course, for his music. So I just want to thank everyone for all of the effort, and people, I understand some people donated wine. Jess?
Stefano Liviano.
Stefano Liviano, yes, donated some wine. But yes, people have been incredibly generous. And I would ask you if not only to look at the work and enjoy it, but to email, put it out on Instagram, use your accounts, just push it out there. Because one thing is to sell it, but another thing is to get people to come into the events. We're having several talks in the next few days of different perspectives. Young people who are adventurers and photographers and guides, wilderness guides, are going to come and talk. Some of the older folk who were there in the early days are going to talk. Anita Wild, who's doing the restoration, the ecological part of the restoration management plan, she's going to talk with Chris Harries and I about the nuts and bolts of some of the energy issues and the ecological issues that the restoration. There's a lot of effort gone into thinking about how we might raise awareness and educate the public about the issues. So please push it out there. And meanwhile, enjoy being here in the heart of Tasmania's wilderness, because that's what it feels like. You walk in and you see these beautiful colours and landscape and you just go, oh, yes, this is what we need to do, put the heart back into the wilderness. So have a glass of wine, enjoy the artwork, and thank you very much for coming, and hopefully might see you in the next few days at some of the other events. Thank you very much.